Hello and welcome to Property Question Time. I'm Stephen Galpin and this is a show where you can have your property related questions answered by our team of property experts. And joining me today is Ryan Hughes, CEO and founder of Mr. Investa brand of buy-to-let experts. Welcome back, Ryan.
Thanks, Stephen.
And joining Ryan is John Reynolds, CEO of Titan Property Developments. Good to see you again, John.
And you, Stephen.
Thank you. Thank you both for coming in, and we'll get right on with the questioning, which is, Ryan, can I ask the panel who have experience of buy-to-let how they find and screen prospective tenants if they want to undertake this process by themselves? I suppose that means as opposed to getting an insurance-backed sort of rental guarantee or something, isn't it?
Yeah, don't do it.
Don't do it.
Yeah, don't do it.
Yeah.
As they're writing that question or typing that question, that is the answer. It really depends on the portfolio. If it's the first one, stay well away from it. If you've got a portfolio of 10 plus and you're well versed in it and you've done it multiple times, there's a lot of people that get to a certain stage and go, I could do this myself. And I completely understand that, but there's a reason why these people, management companies and these, whether it's anti-money laundering, whether it's guarantors, you really need to make sure that all them boxes are ticked. And it can be a lot of work. Some people don't see it because, a letting agent or a management company can do it very quickly, but that's what they're doing day to day. When you're doing it as, one piece of paperwork can mess up the whole investment.
Yeah. I was reading an article the other day and they were talking about this open banking, and they were saying just be very careful with this open banking. It does give you access to financial information through various channels of people, but it's not necessarily going to address the questions you want answering as a landlord, and as to whether somebody's been a good tenant, a bad tenant, or whatever else. So you've got to be careful of your source, haven't you?
I think tenant referencing is still one, we used to do it all on paper and stuff and request it, and they'd send the letter back and say, yeah, this person's fine, or, no, in marker, and send it back. But I think it's like any sort of referral, you do want to hear it from another source, from if they've rented before or if they've got a guarantor, and making sure that a lot of people say, oh yeah, they've got a guarantor if I don't pay, but say that person can't pay. There's a lot of that. So yeah.
Yeah, I suppose also you've got to decide at what level you want this sort of support for your tenant applications, because there are some companies which advertise these sort of rental guarantees where they'll pay you even in advance for the whole year, won't they, on the basis of the strength of the tenant. Alternatively, there is, as you say, the sort of credit reference agency type sort of service. So I think where would you go? Somewhere in the middle?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of guides. It's like if you want landlord insurance, a lot of our landlords that have large portfolios don't have landlord insurance because they have a sinking fund themselves because they're well oiled, and they go, no, actually for that insurance that I'm paying out, that property never has an issue, that just goes in the sinking fund. So when my washing machine goes here or my boiler goes here, that comes out of my own personal sinking fund. I suppose it's down to how you manage it. Rental assurances schemes that they have sound great, but aren't always what they're cracked up to be. And obviously, when you're looking at a position that we're in now, that obviously eats away at your profit. Then your mortgage goes up and all of a sudden, you've just got a property for nothing. It's not actually making you any income because it's so well covered, and it's great to be covered, but you're not actually making anything from it. And obviously, if we look at the pandemic, a lot of them didn't pay out because of the circumstance, and that wasn't in the contract. So you have to really read the T's and C's on some of them.
I think you also make a good point there about sort of experience, really. If it's probably your first buy-to-let or second, or you're fairly small, it wouldn't hurt you to try out these various schemes, these various services, and then decide as and when you do it yourself through experience.
Right? I've done that as almost an accidental landlord through development and then actually keeping units.
I didn't
that
think anything you did was accidental.
There's a few things that haven't gone quite according to plan over the last few years. And as a developer coming through that journey and then keeping units, I've tried all sorts of things. What I would say is that if you can find someone that's clearly really good at doing the references and does that professionally, it's going to be far better than you doing it. One thing that concerns me though, with the cost of living crisis and interest rates, is how many landlords are going to try and cut costs. And cut the costs on certain things that then could, not only are they confronted with all the problems they've got already, and then a problem tenant.
And of course, a lesser number of tenants that hit the criteria.
Yes.
I mean, as rates go up, as salaries seem to stay pretty stagnant, it's quite a problem, isn't it?
Oh, there's gonna be a huge issue of, you need to be earning 30,000. That's going to go 40, 50,000 because these people need to know you can really cover it.
Well, it's all, the conditions are almost becoming as stringent as those you need to get a mortgage, really.
Exactly. I've heard someone else say that. Yeah.
We're on it here. Okay, great. John, your question. What, in the panel's view, will be the most significant contribution from developers that will drive forward sustainable property development in the short to medium term? Well, we've talked to this ad nauseum, haven't we, in the past?
And actually, it's asking what's the most sustainable.
Do?
I mean, what is the most sustainable? Because it's a combination of a lot of things. If you are developing from scratch, where do you start? You can literally go from all the building materials to the planning itself, the actual construction type, modular. So in fact, that's probably a good answer to the question, overarching, modular construction and the bigger picture of planning developments, making more things walkable and cyclable and green spaces. But if you're talking the smaller developer, the refurbishment side of things, it's going to have to be the solar panels, it's going to have to be the energy efficiency and sort of sustainable materials that are going to take away from fossil fuels and be better for the environment. But I don't know which one. Maybe there's a stat out there that one of those particular improvements is the best.
What I'm interested there, John, is as a developer, when you've got a clean site and you want to go in for planning, I mean, I'm just thinking 10 years ago, what would be the percentage of your consideration about green issues and what's the percentage today?
I mean, you know the answer to that, and you're smiling at me. And even you said 10 years ago, not that many years ago. There were people. It's a bit like the electric cars when they became, or the hybrids, which I know you embraced. Lots of people didn't embrace it. There were certain people that wanted to, that suited how their brain was working and the things they're seeing, and knowing that the planet needs help and we need to be environmentally friendly. But certainly, from a development point of view, very little. Whereas I think that's the problem. It's being rushed in so much now without actually talking to the relevant people of how to subsidise it or support. And it is being passed on to the developer at a critical time when interest rates have gone up. Cost of borrowing clearly then massively affects the appraisal of a deal. And the material costs have gone up anyway, plus the cost of labour. So just doing a normal development in a normal way, however that used to be, without using these sustainable materials and energy efficiency, then if you start talking about high performance insulation, triple glazing, sustainable timber, recycled steel, air source heat pumps, all of this is brilliant. They're brilliant initiatives, but who's paying for it?
Well, it's going to be the end user, isn't it? Unfortunately, and then the building societies and mortgage providers who don't want to fund it.
I think the problem is, though, like you say, it's all right you're doing these and adding these additional bits in, but then if the market doesn't demand that, or you're getting an appraisal from the local agent who's going to sell it, it's not the end user passing it on. It comes back and goes, well, I need to get rid of it. I need to sell it. So then you've got to bite the bullet on it.
Yeah. I mean, you said the end user over time, but at this moment in time, the developer, which I think the question was aimed at, what's the most sustainable materials or way of moving forwards? It's the developer that's incurring the costs, taking the risk to hope that that's the way forward. And of course, a lot of these things potentially are evolving. Will it be solar panels in 10 years' time? Or will something else have come along that Elon Musk has invented that is kind of like, why were we doing that? And we've all embraced it. It goes back to the diesel car, electric car.
Well, I'm afraid it does, doesn't it? That's the trouble. I mean, we were talking on one of the programs a few weeks ago to somebody who imports building materials, and they were saying, well, never mind about green materials going up. We're actually buying the same products, but because of all the sanctions and the war in Ukraine and everything else, we're not actually buying our wood from Russia or Siberia or anywhere like that anymore. Actually, we are, but we're buying it because it's been sent to China, and we now buy it from China. But of course, it's costing 4 times as much to get
shipping
here.
costs.
Yeah, I mean,
this is where it gets complicated.
It does.
It's a tick box exercise
Yeah.
that conforms to green efficiency to meet some government legislation, but actually, it's probably not actually that green at all.
Okay, well, I think we'll park that one there. That's all we've got time for in this half of the show. So join me again after the break when we'll be asking John and Ryan more of your questions. Hello and welcome back to part 2 of Property Question Time. I'm Stephen Galpin and I'm joined by Ryan Hughes and John Reynolds. Welcome back, guys.
Thank you.
Ryan, your second question. With the advent of no-fault evictions, aren't the government heading back to the 80s and the creation of short-hold tenancies when in those days landlords could rarely get their properties back once let? The introduction of ASTs did much to increase the country's rental housing stock. Are we not in danger of creating a reticence to rent out of our properties and the associated shortages once again?
Yeah, most definitely. It's some scary times ahead for certain individuals because, as we've seen last year, over 30,000 registered buy-to-lets were disposed of just last year, and that number is going to significantly increase this year. The appetite for landlords is just becoming more and more of a higher risk. So I think we're going to see a lot more people leave the market because of this no-fault eviction.
Just to stop you there, when you say 30,000 left the market last year, I suppose we've got to have the other figure, haven't we? How many came in? Or how many would normally come in on an annual basis?
Well,
what sort of figure would it be?
Well, usually depending on new builds, you'd probably see it at around the 15 to 20,000, and obviously that spiked over the years, but we've just seen a massive increase. So from previous years, people leaving the market has been sort of half of that, and that's just generally selling on.
Yeah.
But there's been a 50%, maybe 30% increase in people disposing of them.
So a proper exodus, really.
Well, it's a clear indicator of you have your standard customers disposing of it. That's not to say they're not selling to go into development or rotating the portfolio, but a lot of people that we know that are selling buy-to-lets are, right, we're staying in this house now, but we're having a house extension and the rates from the bank to get a loan on it are too much. We can't remortgage because the rates have gone too high, but actually we've got 50, 60 grand sat in that house. It causes a load of headache. The margins are going slimmer and slimmer and slimmer. Let's sell it and just do the house extension. There's multiple reasons, and it all tends to be around the finance aspect of it. But the no-fault eviction is just very, very worrying with these increasing costs to the landlord.
Yeah. So, I mean, again, we've discussed this before. Do you think it's time for a different type of lease, a different type of arrangement to rent our properties out?
I don't see where it's come from. It's all of a sudden something that was working, and if anything, the landlords needed more support.
Are the government trying to fix a problem that's not there?
I believe so. I think they're sort of supporting the wrong party.
Supporting the tenant.
Supporting the tenant, which I'm all for, but there's two parties involved, and one's been getting a lot of support more and more. First-time buyers, these are a lot of people that have come in out of rent. Here's some support to get you on the ladder. There's constant support, but what's happened for landlords over the past 4 or 5 years?
It feels like the landlord is just being totally persecuted, and you're asking where it's coming from. I don't really know. I don't know
Licensing,
if it's
no-fault evictions, higher stamp duty rate, an additional 3%. Constant.
I mean, it's come from central government, so that's often opinion-led. And that typically might be that there are landlords that in the nicest way have gained the wrong attention for not being great landlords. But then if everyone's been punished for that,
it's soundbite led, isn't it?
That's what I'm thinking, yeah. Because you've got to protect tenants. There are landlords that, you should treat a tenant as a customer, as a landlord, and you get a good tenant, a well-behaved tenant from that, and the property is maintained. So that relationship between landlord and tenant is between the landlord and the tenant. Why does the government need to get involved? Particularly when the landlord now is seriously struggling to make any money out of
John,
the asset.
what happens there is the government get involved and they don't think it through. It's like, I think we were talking in the break about discrimination. Well, of course, we're all against any kind of discrimination, but it has to be done in a reasonable way. For instance, I live in a block of flats here where it categorically states no animals.
Sure.
Now, the government are bringing in legislation that's going to say you may not discriminate in that way. So whose document takes precedence, the government document or my head lease? I don't know. Where are we going with this?
And then the other thing that gets taken away from that is I'm a landlord with a number of flats in different blocks, and I'll get the letting agent say, look, we've got a lady who's moving in, she's 16, she's got a cat that she's had with her for 20 years, maybe not 20 years, 10 years. Is it okay? And then I can actually have some discretion rather than a bad example, an Alsatian that's going to bark all the time in a block of flats. That's no good. So you have the option to, again, it's that landlord-tenant relationship. Why does the government need to come in and get involved and muddy it? Because it's a relationship that's trying to protect both parties. You don't want, use your pet's example, something that upsets the whole block.
No.
But it's a sensible conversation. Don't need...
But also, you've got to decide who's going to adjudicate on these matters once it becomes a dispute.
Yeah, your point there is valid. I don't know the answer to that. In terms of in the block, if you've got a legal document and then you've got legislation, it's a little bit like something we talked about in the previous programme where you had the EWS1 form, external wall system with cladding on the back of the Grenfell Tower disaster. RICS brought that in to protect surveyors. And then governments say, no, you don't need that, and then RICS are saying, well, you do. And the lenders have said, well, we won't lend unless you've got one. It's that whole government getting involved in stuff that's muddy.
Well, my views on government and the housing market.
Yes, so, and my view on who should be Prime Minister.
Oh, right. Yes, as I've said before, John, I think it might take a little bit more than a recommendation by yourself.
Yeah. But as I say, you've got my vote.
Appreciate it.
I think.
Okay. What about you, Ryan? Are you going to vote for me?
Oh, 100%, 100%. I think the biggest problem though that people are missing is, yeah, I get it with leaseholds, you're always going to be held accountable by someone else. But when you've got freehold houses or you own the freehold and people are dictating to you what you can do with your investment, even on the leasehold, when you own the apartment, you can't say who you want in that property. It's your investment. And when you bought that, no pets were allowed, for example. But now pets are, well, no, on the investment, I wanted no pets allowed. I wanted to be able to decide there's no pets. It cost me a lot of money. I don't want them chewing at the door frame, or I don't want them ruining the new flooring.
Yeah.
That's your choice of your investment. And now someone's saying, actually, what you've done with your money, I'm telling you have to allow this.
Very difficult. Very difficult.
I don't see why you're getting involved.
Yeah.
I don't want a pet in my property. When it's leasehold and someone wants pets in, and they can request it.
Sure.
You can't help that, but you should be able to stop someone in your own property.
Yeah.
Like you say.
And this is where the landlord is just being removed from any.
It's my money. I'm housing someone, helping the housing by providing properties to live in. But you can tell me who I can and can't have in there. But let me tell you, if they stop paying the rent because of ethnicity, of religion, cooking cultures, and all of a sudden your money is just, it's exposed.
It's dead, yeah.
It's exposed.
And for how long?
Yeah.
Well, then it's you picking up the bill.
No, I know.
It's you picking up the bill.
Yeah. And so it's very easy, isn't it, to say, well, all these faults can be rectified, a little bit of money spent on. But, you shouldn't necessarily have to do that at the end of each tenancy, spend fortunes getting it right for the next occupant. Anyway, we better move on. John, do the panel think that the inevitable voids in income caused by the new and mandatory retrospective improvements to insulation, etc., on older properties will cause difficulties between lenders and borrowers?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, it's
I agree.
we've got is it 2028 EPC energy performance certificate has got to end up being at C or above for landlords. Is something you must have. So whether you're doing it now or planning on it doing it, you've got to afford that, and to be able to do a lot of those initiatives, you've got to have the place empty. And at that point, just like the previous question, actually, you're paying the mortgage. I mean, it does come down to cash flow. If you haven't got a mortgage or borrowing on the property, then of course, yes, you're not getting income, but perhaps it's not quite as painful. It certainly is if that income, your yield, is ultimately covering bank debt, and you've got to then find the costs to be able to do it.
Well, I think there's a greater danger too. I mean, John, you will know, you've done enough of it in the past. If you're doing renovation, it's never what you think, because you start stripping out the loft and you find something else, you find timber.
One thing leads to another.
Yeah.
Always. Yeah.
So you've got huge costs there doing retrospective works. And then on top of that, you have got this business. Your tenant's not going to sit there while you're doing all this. So you've either got to rehouse them, or ask them to leave, or have this void. And I mean, if you're paying a fairly expensive mortgage on top of these renovation costs, I mean, it's going to cost a fortune.
And some of the older properties, I mean, we actually, as a family, have just sold a property in a lovely old converted building, because from the roof all the way to the brickwork to the old windows, the whole thing was terrifying of how to get that to an EPC rating of C. And actually, in that example, the whole block needs to do it. So that's another conversation of getting, in this instance, it was 8 flats. Because an individual landlord, you're going to have to look at high performance insulation, you're going to have to look at some building materials, you're going to have to look at maybe triple glazing. It all costs a lot of money. Well as not earning any.
On top of that, John, if you start, you're doing the roof, as often as not, you just force the cold area or out from downstairs.
You trap all the cold air. And there's a lot of, and this is what hasn't been thought out, and something we said before, where the initiatives that are suggested, and I think it's great to suggest them, they're not necessarily stress tested. How many times have we said to stress test? So if you do part of them, you can create more problems further down the line. The kind of roof example is a really good one. And that can ripple all the way through in a number of the examples. So it is a tricky one.
My worry is with the houses, the lower end of the market, the cheaper properties, not necessarily age-wise, but price-wise, because you can have a 3-bed semi-detached for sub 100 grand, and you can have a 3-bed semi-detached for 300 grand, but the windows and doors still cost the same amount. And the rent on the 100 grand property doesn't cover the upgrading, the refurbishment that's required, but it's still going to cost exactly the same amount as the 300k property. That's the big worry for me.
Well, on that happy note, we'll have to end the show. Now, I hope our viewers realise that I might be addressing you as your next Prime Minister next time, if it's left to Mr. Reynolds here. But anyway, Ryan Hughes, CEO and founder of Mr. Investa, thank you very much for coming in today. John Reynolds, CEO of Titan Property Developments, thank you for coming in today. Great answers to the questions. I'm Stephen Galpin. Look forward to seeing you next time on Property Question Time.